It was supposed to be just another Friday night in our dusty little town, where nothing ever happens and the diner's neon sign hums louder than the conversations inside. But then he walked in the Marine. Everyone whispered about the boy who left in uniform and came back heavier with secrets. And just like that, I knew I was in trouble. His name was Daniel Hayes. He wasn't supposed to look at me like that. Not with those tired eyes that carried wars I'd never fought and silences I could never name. But the truth was written in the way he lingered at the door, the way his gaze caught mine like it had always been searching for it. I had spent years telling myself that he would never know, that my quiet devotion would remain exactly that, quiet. Yet the universe has a way of burning down the walls we build. I should back up. My name's Ethan Miller. 22, college dropout, working shifts at the only gas station that still runs 24 hours in town. My life had been simple, predictable, painfully small, until Daniel came back. The last time I saw him, he was 18 and carrying a duffel bag that looked heavier than his frame. Everyone in town clapped him on the shoulder, told him to make us proud, Marine. I had stood at the edge of the crowd, biting my tongue until it bled, pretending I wasn't watching the way his hand clenched and unclenched around the strap of that bag, pretending I didn't want to run to him, hold him, beg him to stay. But that wasn't who I was allowed to be. Not then. So I watched him leave, and I swore he'd never know. Now, standing in that diner, watching him walk toward me, all the air in my lungs felt stolen. His hair was shorter, darker, his jaw sharper, his shoulders broader. But the same softness was buried in his eyes. That same Daniel who once taught me how to skip rocks by the lake and dared me to climb the old water tower at midnight. Ethan, he said, voice low, like the word itself was something fragile. I swallowed hard. Daniel, that should have been it. Two names exchanged, two ghosts acknowledging each other. But his lips tugged into the smallest of smiles, and my heart did something reckless inside my chest. We sat across from each other in the booth. The waitress poured coffee neither of us touched. Silence pressed down on us, thick and unbearable. I wanted to ask everything, where he'd been, what he'd seen, why he came back. Instead, I blurted, "You look different." He raised a brow, the corner of his mouth twitching. Different good or different bad? My face heated. Good. Definitely good. His laugh was quiet, almost surprised, as if he hadn't used it in a long time. And for a flicker of a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who had been waiting for this moment. The night stretched on, pulling us deeper into conversations that slipped between the cracks of who we used to be and who we had become. He told me pieces of stories, half-finished sentences that hinted at deserts, at long nights, at friends who didn't come home. His eyes would go distant, and I'd reach out without thinking, my hand brushing his across the table. He didn't pull away. By the time the diner closed, we were still there, still clinging to the illusion that we had all the time in the world. Outside, the summer air was heavy with crickets and the faint smell of gasoline from the lot. He walked me to my truck, his hands shoved in his pockets like he was afraid of what they might do if they weren't restrained. "Ethan," he said, and my name on his lips felt like a prayer. "Yeah." His jaw tightened. His eyes dropped to the ground, then lifted to mine. "There's something I should tell you." My chest seized. Every possibility ran through my head, none of them good. Maybe he was leaving again. Maybe he'd fallen in love with someone else. Maybe the walls I'd built around my heart weren't about to be burned down, but crushed under the weight of reality. But then, softly, he said, "I missed you." I froze. The world tilted. I must have looked like an idiot, just staring at him like I couldn't understand the English words he had spoken. "You missed me?" I echoed, voice breaking. Daniel nodded. "More than I should have." His throat worked like the admission cost him something. More than I was allowed to. The space between us shrank, not because we moved, but because the truth had pulled us closer. My hand shook as I reached for him, not daring to hope, not daring to breathe. He caught my wrist gently, his grip firm but trembling. His eyes searched mine, begging for something: permission, courage, salvation. And then he whispered, "I thought you'd never know. I thought I'd never say it. But Ethan, I feel it too." The night swallowed us whole after those words, and I wasn't sure if I was breathing or drowning. His hand was still on my wrist, warm, trembling, real. For years I had replayed different versions of this moment in my head fantasies. Daydreams, late-night prayers whispered into my pillow. But none of them ever matched the rawness of hearing Daniel Hayes tell me he felt it too. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I wanted to kiss him until neither of us could pretend anymore. But all I managed was a shaky whisper. Daniel! He released me like he was afraid he'd broken something. His hand fell back to his side, his body stiff, his gaze flickering toward the darkness beyond the diner lot. Sorry, he muttered. I shouldn't have said that. My chest burned. The hell you shouldn't. That made him look back at me, startled. His eyes glinted in the dim streetlight, haunted but desperate. You think I haven't been waiting to hear those words since the day you left? My voice cracked, but I didn't care. You think I don't know what it's like to choke on everything you can't say? For a moment he just stood there. Silence stretched between us like a wire pulled too tight. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged, his breath spilling out like surrender. I didn't want you to wait for me, he admitted. I didn't want to ruin your life, Ethan. I thought if I stayed quiet you'd find someone safe. Someone who could give you everything I couldn't. I laughed, sharp and bitter, because it hurt too much not to. Well, you miscalculated. Because no one else was ever you. The words hit him, I could see it. He flinched like truth had a weight, and it finally landed. The summer air pressed hot against my skin. The whole town was asleep, and it felt like the world had shrunk down to just us, standing between my rusty old truck and the flickering diner sign. He took a step closer. Just one. But it was enough. Ethan, he said again, low and rough, as if my name was the only anchor he had left. I didn't wait this time. My hand found his, fingers slipping between his like they belonged there. His breath caught, sharp and shallow, and for a heartbeat we just stood there, holding on, saying more in silence than words ever could. Then he bent his forehead to mine. The world spun, steadied, and I felt him exhale against me like finally, after years of running, he'd found a place to rest. God, he whispered, voice breaking. I've wanted this for so long. Then don't let go, I breathed, and he didn't. But the universe doesn't hand out happiness without testing you first. The next morning, sunlight shattered the fragile cocoon of the night before. Daniel was already gone when I woke up, though he'd left his coffee mug in the sink, like a ghost of proof that he had been there. I went to work at the gas station, and the whole time I couldn't stop replaying Itha's voice, his hand, the way his forehead had pressed against mine like a promise. I should have been floating. Instead, a knot of fear twisted in my stomach, because in this town, whispers were louder than truths. By noon, the whispers started. Did you hear? Daniel Hayes was back at the diner last night. Sat there for hours with Ethan Miller. Strange, isn't it? Those two always were inseparable, back in high school. I kept my head down, stocked the shelves, rang up smokes and soda for people who looked at me a second too long. My pulse thundered with every sideways glance. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe no one knew. But then Sheriff Collins came in, his eyes narrowing when he saw me behind the counter. He leaned on the register like he had all the time in the world. You see Hayes yet? He asked casually. My mouth went dry. Ran into him last night. Why? He shrugged, though his stare didn't budge. Good kid. Shame what the Marines do to boys like that. They come back. Different. He paused, his lip curling almost imperceptibly. You just watch yourself, Miller. The words lodged in my throat, heavy and sour. I nodded, pretending I didn't understand, pretending I wasn't shaking inside. When he left, I sat down behind the counter and pressed my hands to my face. This was it. This was why Daniel had kept quiet. This was why he'd thought silence was safer. Loving him was going to cost us. That night, he showed up at my apartment. No warning. No knock, just Daniel, standing in the doorway with storm clouds in his eyes. We need to talk, he said. My chest tightened. I stepped aside and let him in, my heart pounding like I was about to be sentenced. He paced the tiny living room, fists clenched, jaw tight. People are talking. About us. I sank onto the couch. Yeah, I heard. He turned, his stare sharp and wounded all at once. You don't get it, Ethan. They don't just talk. They judge. They ruin. They make it impossible to breathe. His voice cracked, raw. I can't lose you to their poison. You won't? I said, fierce even though my throat burned. He shook his head, running a hand through his hair like he was unraveling. You don't know what it's like, living every second with a target on your back. Out there in uniform, one wrong move, one wrong word, and it's over. And here, this town doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget. I stood, stepping toward him. Then let them choke on their whispers. Let them stare. I don't care, Daniel. I've been silent long enough. He looked at me, then really looked, and something inside him broke. His breath hitched, his hands trembled, and suddenly he pulled me into him, crushing me against his chest like I was the only thing keeping him from falling apart. His lips found mine, desperate, shaking, alive, and I kissed him back with everything I had, with every year of waiting, every sleepless night, every secret I'd swallowed until it nearly killed me. When we finally tore apart, gasping, his forehead pressed to mine again, he whispered, I don't know how to do this. Together, I told him. That's how. The days that followed blurred into something fragile and intoxicating. We learned each other all over again, the way he liked his coffee too bitter, the way he laughed with his whole body when I managed to drag a smile out of him, the way he slept with his arm flung across me like he was terrified I'd disappear. But shadows lurked everywhere. At the grocery store, old Mrs. Kane whispered too loudly when she saw us in the same aisle. At the bar, two guys from Daniel's high school football team made crude jokes just loud enough for us to hear. At night, Daniel sat on my porch with a cigarette he never smoked. Daniel burst through the door a second later, his uniform shirt clinging to him with sweat, his eyes wild. Pack a bag, he rasped. What? I dropped the box in my hands. He grabbed my arm, pulling me into the narrow aisle between motor oil and windshield wipers. His grip was too tight, his breath ragged. They know, Ethan. Someone saw us last night together. The world tilted. Daniel, they called my CO. He cut in, voice low and broken. They're threatening to file a report. Conduct unbecoming. You know what that means? Court-martial. Discharge. My career, everything gets over if this sticks. I felt like I'd been punched. The air left my lungs in one brutal rush. You can't just run, I managed. His eyes searched mine, frantic. Then tell me what the hell I'm supposed to do. I swallowed hard, forcing the words out past the panic clawing my chest. We don't run. We fight. He stared at me like I'd grown another head. Fight who? The Corps? This town? The whole damn world? Yes, I said. My voice was trembling, but I didn't back down. If we don't, they win. And I'm not going back to living like a ghost. Something in him faltered then. His grip loosened, his eyes filling with something raw, something I'd never seen in him before. Fear. Not of the Marines, not of the town, but of losing me. Ethan. His voice cracked. I don't want you to get destroyed because of me. I lifted his hand and pressed it to my chest, over the thundering heartbeat that had been his since we were kids. You're not destroying me. You're saving me. Don't you see that? For a long moment he didn't move. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead filled the silence. Then, slowly, he bent his forehead to mine, the way he always did when words weren't enough. Okay, he whispered. Together. The first battle wasn't with the Marines. It was with my father. He showed up at my apartment 2 nights later, his face set in stone, his fists clenched like he was holding himself back from hitting something or someone. Tell me it isn't true, he demanded. I froze in the doorway. Dad, don't you dare lie to me, Ethan. His voice thundered, the same voice that had barked orders my whole childhood, the same voice that had drilled into me what was normal and what wasn't. Behind me, I felt Daniel's presence before I saw him. He stepped into the hallway, his posture straight, his chin lifted, his eyes steady. A Marine even here, even now. It's true, he said. My father's face turned crimson. You. His finger jabbed toward Daniel like a weapon. You poisoned my son. You dragged him into this sickness. Something in me snapped. Years of silence, of swallowing down who I was, exploded out of me in one ragged breath. No, I shouted. He didn't drag me anywhere. I've loved him since we were kids. I just didn't have the guts to say it. The hallway rang with my confession. My father's mouth opened and closed, like he couldn't process the words. His voice broke. You're no son of mine. The words cut deeper than any blade. But before the pain could sink its claws too deep, Daniel's hand found mine, squeezing hard, grounding me. You're wrong, Daniel said quietly, but firmly. He's more a man than you'll ever be. My father's glare shifted to him, sharp enough to kill. But he didn't speak again. He just turned, stormed down the stairs, and slammed the door behind him. I stood there shaking, my whole body collapsing under the weight of what just happened. Daniel pulled me into his chest, wrapping me in arms that shook almost as much as I did. I'm sorry, he whispered into my hair. I clung to him. Don't be. I'd rather lose him than lose myself. And for the first time in my life I meant it, but the core didn't back down. A week later, Daniel got the letter. Summons for an inquiry. Formal, cold, merciless. They'll strip me of everything, he said, holding the paper like it was a death sentence. I took it from his hands, ripped it in half, and threw it into the trash. Then we'll build something new, I said, but he didn't look convinced. His shoulders slumped, his eyes darkened, and for the first time I saw the Marine break. That night he came apart in my arms. The strong, steady man the world saw was gone, replaced by someone trembling, someone who pressed his face to my chest and whispered, I'm scared, Ethan. I don't know who I am without this uniform. I held him tighter, my own tears soaking into his hair. You're Daniel. You're the boy who taught me how to swim in the lake. The man who came back even when the world chewed you up. The only person I've ever loved. You're not your uniform. You never were. His sob broke something in me, but it also mended something else. Because in that moment we weren't Marine and boy next door. We weren't soldier and civilian. We were just Daniel and Ethan. Two boys from a small town who had found each other in a world determined to keep us apart. And that had to be enough. It wasn't the core that saved him. It wasn't the town. It wasn't even me. It was him. The day of the inquiry, Daniel walked in wearing his dress blues, polished to perfection, his spine straight as a blade. He looked every inch the Marine they wanted him to be except for one thing. He didn't hide anymore. When they asked if the rumors were true, he didn't dodge. He didn't deny. Yes, he said, voice steady. I'm in love with Ethan Miller. And if that makes me unfit to serve, then maybe it's not me who's failing this country. Maybe it's you. The room fell silent. His words echoed off the walls, daring anyone to challenge them. And in that silence, Daniel Hayes became more than a Marine. He became mine. We left that building with no answers, no guarantees. But when his hand found mine in the parking lot, in broad daylight, in front of everyone who had won something bigger. We had won ourselves. That night, lying in bed with him, my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady against my ear, I realized something. We weren't at the end of our story. We were at the beginning. And for the first time, the beginning didn't terrify me. Because whatever came next, we would face it together. The days after the inquiry felt like living in a waiting room with no clock. Every morning Daniel checked the mail. Every night he checked his phone. And in between he carried the tension of a man standing on the edge of a cliff. The town was divided. Some people nodded at him with respect, as if his honesty had carved out a new kind of courage they hadn't seen before. Others crossed the street when they saw us walking together, muttering under their breath like love was contagious. We got stares at the diner, whispers at the grocery store, silence at church. But we also got unexpected kindness, the cashier at the corner store who slipped Daniel a free cup of coffee, the teenager at the gas station who told me in a whisper, "It means something, seeing you too." And through it all, we held on to each other. One night, lying on the hood of my old truck under a sky dripping with stars, Daniel let out a long breath. "What if they throw me out?" he asked. I turned my head toward him. His profile was sharp against the night, strong and scared all at once. "Then you build a new life. With me." He was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, "That sounds less like losing and more like winning." I smiled into the dark. Exactly. The letter came on a Tuesday. Daniel stood frozen in the kitchen, envelope in hand, like it might explode. His fingers shook as he ripped it open, his eyes scanning the words once, twice, 3 times. Then he looked at me. "They're not discharging me," he said, voice breaking. I'm being reassigned. Stateside. Non-combat. Relief and grief tangled in his expression. Relief because he wasn't being cast out. Grief because he knew he'd never wear the uniform the same way again. I crossed the kitchen and wrapped my arms around him, my cheek pressed to his chest. "You're still you," I whispered. "No piece of paper changes that." He clung to me like he was drowning. "I thought I'd lose everything." "You didn't," I said. "You found me." We built something new piece by piece. He started volunteering at the local high school, teaching kids discipline through workouts, mentoring boys who had nowhere else to look for strength. I picked up more shifts, but I also started writing again the way I used to before the world told me stories like mine didn't matter. The town never fully stopped talking, but the noise dulled, the way all storms do when people grow tired of holding their umbrellas. And slowly, small acts of acceptance replaced the sharp edges of judgment. Mrs. Kane from the grocery store eventually handed Daniel a basket of apples and muttered, "For the both of you." The sheriff stopped glaring, though he never apologized. And my father stayed silent for months, until one evening he knocked on my door. Daniel answered. They stood there, two men who had shaped me in different, conflicting ways, staring at each other like a battlefield stretched between them. "Is he here?" my father asked. Daniel stepped aside, letting him in. I stood in the living room, heart hammering. My father looked older than I remembered. His shoulders stooped, his eyes tired. "I was wrong," he said, the words heavy, reluctant, but real. "Doesn't matter if I understand. Doesn't matter if it was what I wanted. You're my son, and I don't want to lose you." Tears burned behind my eyes. I wanted to scream at him, to ask why it took him so long, why his love had conditions. But then Daniel's hand slid into mine, steadying me. And I realized forgiveness wasn't for him, it was for me. "I'm still me," I said quietly. "Still your son. But I won't apologize for who I love." My father nodded, swallowing hard. "I don't ask you to." And for the first time, I believed him. A year later, Daniel and I stood by the lake where we used to skip rocks as kids. The air smelled of pine and summer rain, the water glinting with sunlight. He reached into his pocket, his hands trembling in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Ethan," he said, voice thick, "I don't have a ring yet. Hell, I don't even have a speech. But I fought wars, and nothing terrified me more than the thought of losing you. So, stay with me, always." I laughed through the tears spilling down my cheeks. "That's your proposal?" He grinned, sheepish. "That's all I've got." I cupped his face in my hands, kissed him until the world blurred, and whispered against his lips, "Yes, 1,000 times yes." We weren't a secret anymore. We weren't whispers in the dark or glances across crowded rooms. We were Daniel and Ethan, and after all the silence, all the waiting, all the fear, our love was loud, undeniable, and ours. I thought he would never know, but he did, and he chose me. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.